right. Thanks so much for coming to the mystery panel. I was going to make a dumb joke about how it was going to be a reveal of like what it was going to be. Like it's a big mystery what we're talking about, but I'll not make that joke. Um, Today we're talking to Eli Cranor and Henry Wise about their books. Just a real quick bio of them. Henry is a graduate of the Virginia Military Institute and the University of Mississippi MFA program. His work has appeared in Shenandoah, Nix's Mate, Radar Poetry, Clackamas, and elsewhere. Holy City is his first novel. And Eli Cranor writes from Arkansas, where he lives with his wife and kids. His critically acclaimed debut novel, Don't Know Tough, won the Edgar Award and was named one of the best books of the year by USA Today and one of the best crime novels of the year by the New York Times. His second novel, Ozark Dogs, was a national bestseller. Eli currently serves as the writer in residence at Arkansas Tech University. Welcome, Eli and Henry. So first, Eli, this is your third year in a row to appear at the Mississippi Book Festival. Do you have any words of advice for Henry?
Words of advice. No, just
Great.
drink a lot of water. That'd be my best advice.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first, I just want to start with y'all telling the audience a bit about your books. You can go first, Eli.
Okay. So yeah, my book is called Broiler, and it just came out in July, and it's really it takes a look at two couples. You have a plant manager, and it's set in the chicken processing industry in Arkansas, which is it's just been the craziest thing to go around and talk about at stuff like this. But you have a plant manager, you have his wife, and this plant manager is upping the production, and he keeps upping it, and it puts a lot of strain on our other couple who are line workers. And long story short, the best thing somebody said to me was that they thought it was like a darker version of Raising Arizona. So that's a little bit of not a spoiler, but a little. And so we call it Raising Arkansas. So it can be.
Henry?
Yeah. Holy City. Holy City is really about somebody who's been living in Richmond, the capital of Virginia, for the past 10 years since the tragic death of his mother. And he returns to rural Southside Virginia, where he's from, to face something that happened when he was younger that affected a friend and himself. And he returns as a deputy sheriff, and he doesn't really know exactly what he's trying to do, but he's looking for the right answer. So that's pretty much what it's about. Somebody returning home to face his past.
So this is your first novel, but it's really not your first novel, correct?
Correct.
Okay, can you tell us about the other first novel?
The other first novel was in the same vein. It was just about surfing in Taiwan. And I spent about 10 years, working on this as a graduate student at Ole Miss. And I just couldn't find any. I still believe in the book, but I just didn't have any success finding an agent. I looked for an agent for 7 years. I tried to get one. And, eventually I just realized, I need to see if I've got more to say. And somebody gave me the advice, maybe you should write about home. And I took that advice and I experimented with it, and it turned out to be Holy City. So she was right.
What was the Taiwan surfing book called?
It's called Immortals. There's a theme of sacredness, I think, going on here. Unintentional.
Interesting. So I wanted to, people have asked like, oh, what are the novels about on your panel? While you're in this, they're kind of similar, but in the ways that the writing is really different, And early on, actually, I think the second sentence of the novel has a simile in it. And like right away, like okay, this is what this book is going to be. But a few pages later, you have this description of kudzu. And if I don't think you're allowed to have a Southern book without at least one reference, and this is a gorgeous one. Kudzu cloaked some of the distance with a fecund, verdant monotony, softening the often hard and spiky landscape like a kind of flesh over bones. And I really thought, so when I prepare for these, I read the book first as a reader, and then I go back and make notes. And this one sentence really kind of sums up your book because it's about this lush landscape that is pointy and jagged, and it's about anyway. So I wanted to ask about like the contrast. Was it intentional to have this beautiful lush language about these people whose lives have very bleak and terrible things happen to them throughout?
Yeah, that's a great question, which means I might not be able to answer it. To me, the writing itself was very important. It became important. I think it was organic to the project. Like I never set out to write something that didn't feel right. But I think somewhere along the line, I realized that this language that kind of folds back on itself, that kind of it's almost disorienting at times. I think not always. I mean, I try to write an accessible book, but the language itself did seem to, I'm a poet by trade, which means I'm destined not to make money.
Right.
One reason for turning to fiction as well. But one thing I learned very early on as a poet, really just from reading other poetry, was form at its best, like a poem at its best, allows for the form to underscore or work with the poem to deliver a message. So the writing itself is sort of like a medium. Well, of course it's a medium, but it's sort of like a lens through which you see this world. And so I think the writing does. I don't even know if that answers your question, but
I think it's at least in the neighborhood of answering the question. So we'll take it. And I did ask you this yesterday. So this is really for both of you. So in the biggest bookstore or library in the world where there are very specific subject categories, where would you shelve your books? It can be something that you make up. Is it really in mystery? Is it in crime, thriller, some new thing? Where would you put it?
Chicken plant noir.
Yes, that is actually how I described it. Chicken plant thriller, chicken plant noir. Yeah, that's actually very accurate.
I think Southern lit probably does. I mean, it's being labeled as crime, mystery, and all that, and I think it's mostly Southern literature,
Yeah,
maybe
I would
Virginia
agree.
literature.
Yeah, mystery and what was it that your agent or your editor or somebody said about what makes it a mystery and what makes it a thriller?
Yeah, my editor, so he decided to label the book a mystery, and I asked him about that just because I'd never thought of it as a mystery, even though it technically there is a mystery that's being
Right.
pieced together. But he said he decides between thriller and mystery, which are his two categories because he runs the crime genre at Grove Atlantic. He said that he chooses mystery if something happens that needs to be pieced together, and he chooses thriller if it's just if the book is sort of leading up to a culminating action. I think you still have that with a mystery, or else why would you read? But yeah, I thought that was an interesting way of defining them.
And that really separates y'all's two books because yours is very action oriented and also very nerve wracking. So I read it, I would read it and get to the end of a chapter and close it and put it on the couch. And then I'd pick it up again because I had to know how it was going to resolve. I absolutely couldn't stand it. I mean, in a good way. Yeah. The um, so you mentioned when you were setting up the the summary of your book, you talked about the two couples. So they seem to be totally opposite, right? The the chicken plant manager and the line workers. Can you talk about their parallels though, and how and that? Okay, we'll just start with that part.
Yeah, yeah. So I do. I mean, I think the men in the book kind of mirror each other in a way, and then I think the women also kind of mirror each other in a way. And I don't outline like I don't plan as much as I probably should, um, and I just write. I get an idea and I just start going in on it. So I don't know how that. I mean, I think at our core. As different as people as we want to make everyone out to be that we're all kind of after the same thing. And this book, what I was really going for, what I really was, the big idea was the American dream, like that was. And there's a line that comes in the penultimate chapter that it took me like 80,000 words. This is why I should probably plan better, because once I'd written this line in the first draft, I knew, or I don't even know if it was the first draft, but it was when I wrote this line, it's like I knew what the book was about. And the line is, for every American dream, there is a corresponding nightmare. And that line to me, like if it were a movie, that would be the little, like on the poster, that would be the line. Because as I started unpacking that through revisions, that was what I was showing with all those characters. For you to have this dream, what what are you causing? What are the ramifications? Um, yeah.
Okay, yeah, the second part of my question was going to be about the American dream. So,
Yeah.
great that
Yeah.
we were thinking along the same lines there. Um, the 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 two couples, like you said, the men have some similarities, and they're both not so bright, really. Like their their ideas or
Yeah.
how things are going to play out don't always work, and
Yeah.
it's really the women who save the day.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, me too. I mean, that's how it works in my life. I mean, that's how I feel, on a daily basis. But one thing I really always like to talk about is all four of these characters. I don't, at least when the book starts, there's no defined like antagonist. There's not a, you don't necessarily see like this is the bad guy. This is who we're going against. It's just these four people all going for happiness. And I think everybody from Dostoevsky to Quentin Tarantino has said something like even even the bad guys are the heroes in their own story. That we're not, and that's something I really tried hard to do. I mean, I think by the end we see, where it comes out, but that all these people are not just, they're not just cardboard cutout.
Right.
That's what I tried.
Yeah. No, they were all complex, and even if um, you don't agree with their motivations, like
Which not everybody likes. Some people really want a bad guy to
yeah,
go after. And some people really. And my books, all my books, something I've worked hard to do is I don't know. I mean, me at my worst day, I don't know that you'd root for me either. And I think we're all capable of that.
yeah. So I wanted to talk about uh, you the reader learns a lot about chicken processing plants. How did you go about learning about the plants and your research?
Yeah, so it's weird. So my first book came out in 2022. But by the time that book came out, I had already had that manuscript done, my second done. I had them drafted. My second manuscript and this book were all already drafted in 2022. And it was kind of like what Henry said about writing about home. I knew there's this MMA fighter from Arkansas named Bryce Thug Nasty Mitchell. Y'all might have seen a clip from him, but the clip is he wins this big fight and they go to interview him and they put a mic and he says, every time you put a mic in my face, I'm gonna say Arkansas. And so I've told that story a lot because I feel like that's kind of what I felt like writing, like it was. And so there's really, I mean, Tyson is a huge industry in Arkansas. It's headquarters are about an hour away from where I'm where I was raised and where we live. And the way the story, I didn't set out to think like, oh, I'm going to write about it. I taught public school for 12 years, and I was teaching in a school, ALE, and I had students who would come in and they would put their heads down and they'd go to sleep. Like first day of school, they did it and I'd try and wake them up. And so finally, once they did start waking up, I'd start asking them like, what's going on? And they were working the night shift at the local plant. And so I was writing them, but I wasn't published. And I just started asking them questions. And they started to tell me about how it's really cold. It's 40 degrees in there. How they wear these ponchos in multiple layers because there's like an antibacterial spray. And then they tell me about a metal mesh glove, that you're using so they don't chop their fingers off. And these are 18-year-old, these were seniors, that are coming to school in the morning. I thought, damn, there's a story. But it took me a while, and then that was it. I from there, luckily we were having a bunch of the strikes and the walkouts and stuff going on in Arkansas, so a lot of really good reporting was getting done. But you can't go in one of those places, like it's locked down, like
Oh, yeah.
like yeah. So
That's interesting.
and there's a really great novel, I want to say, Alice Driver, or a really great book that just came out. It's called The Life and Death of the American Worker. And she's from Arkansas. And that book just came out, and it is a detailed reporting of like this. I wish I'd had it, before I'd written.
Right. Henry, I'm guessing your research process was a little different than organically sprouting from 12 years of talking to students.
I did want to write about chickens. I just couldn't find the place.
Well, now you have a source.
That's right.
Yeah. So, what kind of? There are some police things. There's also a really interesting thing that happens. I will not reveal, but how did you go about? If you know what I'm talking about, figuring out if that was a biological possibility.
The
The
imagination.
book, you'll know what I'm talking about.
The imagination is a powerful thing. I try to do as little research as possible.
Okay.
I want it to be plausible, but I do not want being accurate to get in the way of the story.
Right.
And I think somebody else has said that in so many words a little bit better. Once upon a time, I can't remember the quote, but yeah, never let the truth get in the way of a good story, I think. Yeah, I did consult. I had to learn a little bit about the legalities of,
Right.
just arresting somebody. What happens, especially when you're talking about a murder case, and so luckily a person I went to VMI with is a defense attorney in Richmond, which helped a lot.
Yeah.
So I talked to him several times just to make sure that I wasn't saying something implausible.
Right.
As far as the police work went, I did very, very little research, but just tried to really make it about the people, and that's really.
I've watched a lot of Law and Order, and it all seemed very well. It lines up with everything that I've learned there. While your book is, it's very serious, but you do seem to have fun with people's names. I made a list of the ones I really enjoyed. There's Weenie Edgars, Faraday Pace, which is such a great name. Faraday that's just a great name. But she goes by Day. Benico, Herbie Tunes. Like Herbie Tunes is like someone needs a cat named Herbie Tunes. At Cherokee McDaniels, she goes by Cherry. So all of those are fun, but also your main character's name his name is Will Seams, and I wondered if you intentionally gave him a name that is also a verb, or if that was just like, oh no, my uncle's last name is Seams.
No, it felt right. A lot of these were some of the names I changed in the drafting process, because I didn't feel that the names were representative of the character as I saw them. But Will Seams, that name came up right away, and I was thinking, Seams is kind of a weird last name, but it also felt really right to me. I mean, his much of he's motivated by this deep longing and willfulness, but also we're not sure who he really is. Like,
Right.
is he the hero of the story? Is he more complicated than that? What do we feel about Will Seams? And like what you were saying, Eli, about characters, really making them three-dimensional. That is such an important thing to me because that's what I read for. I read to feel invested in the people. It doesn't. When somebody says I didn't like your characters, because actually at a party recently, a friend was generous enough to throw a party for me in celebration of the book. And at this party, which was to celebrate the book, somebody came up to me, a lifelong friend, and was like, "I didn't like your characters."
Like all of them?
I mean, yeah, I didn't like some of your characters, and I was thinking, I don't care.
But like, do you make a name up as you're writing, or do you have like a name bank? Do you collect names?
I mean, I think there's some of that up here. I don't make it. I guess I start listing them at some point, but really in the drafting process for me, the most important thing is just to let the story come out. And I don't know what that means, and I don't know what the names are going to be. Some names stick. Will Seams stuck. Benico stuck. And some names I changed. But yeah, I mean, there are some names, and sometimes they're made up.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes they are made up. They're not names that I've heard, and some of them I've heard, and I'm just like, somebody needs to put that in a book.
Yeah, somebody needs to put Herbie Tunes in this book. Eli mentioned not outlining. What about you? Do you just see what's going to happen, or do you have some kind of structure?
My argument for not outlining is you don't know where the magic's going to come from. You don't know at what stage. Anne Lamott wrote a really famous essay called "Shitty First Drafts," and I think that's my approach. It's just get something on the page. You don't have anything until you do have something on the page. You don't really have anything to work with, and then you kind of sometimes it's surprising where the good stuff is. Sometimes you had to write 3 terrible pages to write a good one.
So, what got edited out? Were there some like just huge plot points that you went down that road and then decided that's not the right road? And this is for both of y'all.
Oh. Well, we're actually very lucky in this crowd because my editor happens to be sitting. Juliet, will you raise your hand so everyone? Yes. So we have a very and Juliet's book is out and she's here as an author, The Lost Boy of Santa Quionia. But because we asked about what got edited out, it was probably 6 revisions for Broiler. It's different than my first 2 books. I was writing across a lot of different gaps and stretching muscles that I haven't stretched. So, I mean, there was at one point where we'd been through like 5 different back and forths. And she said like this one thing. And then I was gone for like a month. And like we didn't correspond. And when I sent her the book, I mean, like the whole second half was. Yeah. So I mean, it's so weird to see what it starts off as, and for me, I mean, all my books, even though, like I said, I had drafts of them, there is a certain kind of alchemy that happens in that editorial process, and they would not be anything what they end up being without Juliet.
I think to answer your question, most of the editing I did on my own before I ever sought an agent. Very little was suggested on the part of my agent, and very little was suggested on the part of my editor. So I got really lucky there. But when I was working on it,
Yeah.
yes, there were a lot of dead ends. there were a lot of dead ends, and I couldn't even tell you what they were exactly. But just there are a lot of times that you invest in something that you think is going somewhere,
A
and
direction that just, yeah.
it just really doesn't. And it's frustrating, but it's a part of realizing what the story really is.
So I mentioned that Broiler made me really nervous, which is, I mean, the point of it, right, is to keep you on the. There's a part that spoils nothing, but there is a character who has the idea of feeding a baby. How old is the baby?
6 months.
6 months. A 6-month-old baby, 2% milk, out of a Mountain Dew bottle with a hole punched in it. And even though that's like not the most stressful thing that happens in the book, it stressed me out
Yeah.
more than almost anything else. Like that was definitely a close the book, take a breath. But so you're like I said on the edge of your seat the whole time, and honestly, like I didn't know what was going to happen at all. However, the last chapter of your book has a different tone. And I was wondering if you would talk about that.
Yeah, well, it is. It's my first two books were really like noir is really what they got classified as. And I got a story on that too. I got asked to go to this film festival in Dallas shortly after Don't Know Tough came out, and they had called it in the New York Times. They'd said Southern noir at its finest, or top shelf Southern noir. And I'll never forget the day after that review came out. My dad called me, and he said, "Son, what's noir?" And I said, "I don't know, man. Like that's just what they're." I mean, it was a term that I wasn't writing toward. I'd cut my teeth on Larry Brown and Harry Cruz and all that stuff. So I thought that's what I was trying to write. And so, Broiler to me, because of all that goes into that book, and we had discussions. We had discussions about that last chapter, and there was a discussion about clipping it. Like, but I really felt like, in order for that roller coaster and that stress and that tension that you're talking about, that we needed one more day. Like we needed, where my first two books don't really do that. They have just kind of the screen goes black and it's over. This book needed that one more day. And so
I needed that.
yeah, well, good. And it's been something that people have really, it's really resonated, and I'm glad because I
It's
wanted
kind of
to.
it's fun.
Yeah.
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 It's not the Mountain Dew bottle.
Yeah.
The-
Yeah.
that might be rolling around the car.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I'll never forget it.
Mm.
So in both of your books, there are many characters of different races than your own. What care did you take in writing Black characters and Mexican characters?
Yeah, I took the same amount of care as I take with any character. I just really, in the editing, my own personal editing process, it's very important for everybody, regardless of race, gender, or whatever, to be human first.
Right.
Have human motivations, because those are the things that people are motivated by. And their race was an interesting layer to insert, but it also didn't define the characters, which was really important to me, because people are motivated by so many complex things, and so I think bringing that into it, trying to be realistic about it to the best of my ability, but to make everybody human first, that was my biggest concern. And other than that, I just tried to write a good story with people that were believable.
Yeah, for me, so the immigrant workers, Gabriella and Edwin, it was a gap. I knew it was a stretch, but what was even maybe as much of a stretch or just as tough was that the other half of this book really, I mean, it's about the chicken processing industry, but what it's really about is motherhood, and so that was this other big, and I wrote it when our son was 6 months old. So we've mentioned this child in this book is 6 months old. His name's Tuck. So I was writing, in this fog of new parenthood, the sleepless nights and all of that stuff. And I think it kind of comes through, but I'll never forget I'd written this draft all on my own, before an agent, before an editor. And when Juliet got it, one of the earliest things she told me, like which this answers your question, this was as we were about to embark on tightening it and cleaning it and really looking at the challenges of a story like this presented me. She had heard it from somebody, and you can quote the person, but what she told me, I ended up writing it on a sheet of paper and taping it like above my desk. Which she was like, Eli, this book inherently presents challenges to you. Like there's going to be challenges, there's going to be gaps. She was like, but you can do it. I trust that you can do it. You just have to meet the challenge with love. Meet the challenge with love. And so I wrote that and then taped it. Do you remember Michael Sears? Yeah, yeah.
I think that's kind of another way of like saying what I'm saying, like trying to find the human. I mean, because if you see that, you can love that character for who they are, and yeah, I think that's interesting.
Um, sometimes a book and its title seem to be at odds, but both of your books have titles that they just completely work with the books. Were they always called Broiler and Holy City?
Yes.
Well, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yours?
Yeah. So my first book, Don't Know Tough, it was always Don't Know Tough. Second book, Ozark Dogs, had about 1,000 different titles, and we went back and forth. And where the title Broiler came from, like in Arkansas, we know all about chicken houses. I mean, it's something when I was a kid, we'd smell one. I'd ask my grandpa, I'd be like, "What is that?" And he'd make a joke like, I was like, "Oh, Pop, that smells horrible." And he's like, "No, son, that smells like money." That's what my grandpa would say. So we knew, but there was this term when I was talking to those students, and those students I was teaching, and they kept saying the broilers, and we're this with the, and it was a term that I'm sure I had heard, but I just thought how perfectly that encapsulated like a thriller, like suspense rising, and then it's also what you call the chickens, that we eat, broiler chicken.
I meant to bring copies of the book so we could look at the covers, but the cover of Broiler is also great. It just has one chicken feather. It looks great. And the cover of your book, tell me about the house on the cover.
Yeah. So I'm an amateur photographer, isn't everybody? But I have I have a film camera that sometimes I take pictures with. I think that's an interesting part of the creative process for me. I don't really associate it with writing, but it actually came into the cover of Holy City. So the house on the cover is one that I photographed in Southside, Virginia, where the book is set. And it's a house that was built in 1839. And that's about all I know. It turns out that I know the person who owns the house. I thought it was just, I mean, has been abandoned for years, but this friend just purchased it, and the plan is to renovate it. And I've actually been inside it. But yeah, and my first like videoed interview was
Yes.
taken in front of that house,
I
which was
watched
cool.
it, and when I saw the house, I gasped because, of course, I thought the house on the cover is just like, hey, draw a creepy old house, but that was it, and the angle of it was also the same angle that we see it from the photograph, apparently, that's on the cover.
It was really cool that that they were willing to travel for that.
Yeah.
And I was like, when I was giving them directions, I was like, y'all are going to lose service. So, because it's kind of out there.
So, let's say these two books are turned into movies. Who is your dream casting for the characters?
People ask, that is a question people ask about, and I never know what to say. Like I never say, Take it away, Henry.
Yeah, I would say I've never been asked that, so thank you. But I would say that I think Will Seams should be played by an unknown. I think that would be really important. I wouldn't want him to be associated with anybody who's sort of, you know. But I think you could always throw Matthew McConaughey in there as the sheriff.
I read him. I was thinking of what's that guy's name? Um, the guy in Stranger Things, like the dad figure. That's who I imagined the whole time. I don't know if he had a mustache, but he did in my mind. I don't remember if does the sheriff have a mustache? Do you remember?
No.
Okay. Anyway, well, I
It's okay. It's okay though. You can put one in
okay,
there.
I did. It didn't really change much. So yeah. What kind of books did you read when you were growing up?
So I have all my background coming up's in like sports. I played football in college and played a season overseas and then coached high school football for 5 years. So as a kid, I was playing baseball, basketball, football year round. And my dad and mom were both public school teachers. And I guess it was like the summer before fifth grade. I think dad thought I was getting to be a little too much of a jock, like too much of a meathead. And so I wake up one summer morning, summer's just started. I'm ready to go get on my bike and go do. And he drops like one of those black and white composition notebooks on my bed. And then he says, son, before you come out of your room every morning, you're going to write a page in there, like a journal. And he's like, and you're going to read 20 pages of any book you want. And that was, he let me read whatever. And I hated it. Every journal entry starts with this the worst day ever, because I got to write in it. But it really, I think that was, it reading and writing are a lot like throwing a football. The more you practice it, the better you get. So by the time I was in sophomore, junior, I was good in English class. It was something I enjoyed. And so a lot of that early stuff, I mean, when I was young, I loved Goosebumps, Where the Red Fern Grows, like all those sort of books. And then as I was coming up, I majored in English literature. So like I said, Larry Brown, Harry Crews, Flannery O'Connor, Jesmond Ward. And then as I got into crime, Elmore Leonard has become my absolute favorite author. I've read all 42 of his novels, and they're just great.
I'm trying to remember. I always like things like adventure stories, like Treasure Island and stuff like that. And I guess Tom Sawyer. I remember that kind of thing. But I didn't really become a serious reader. I mean, I was raised around books. I read. I like the Goosebumps stuff. I just sometimes would pick up. Adventure was the main thing I was interested in, and stories of shipwrecks and stuff like that. I remember like basically borderline crying on the couch in our house because I realized that I'd probably never be in a shipwreck, and I was like, this really sucks. We have a computer. The world's going to hell. I remember when we got a computer, that was a big deal for me. I was like, now I can't like tell my kids that I had it hard, But the book that really turned me on to writing ended up being The Bear by William Faulkner, the novella. Something about that just really resonated with me, and it didn't make me want to be a writer, but it made me want to write, actively write. There was something in the language. I was like, man, I didn't know writing could do this, and so that was a real breakthrough for me.
And how old were you when you?
I was a senior in high school.
Yeah. Okay. So when you're writing, do you have an ideal reader in mind, or maybe not when you're writing, but what is your ideal reader? Like, what have they read? What do they like? What are you going for your reader?
Well, I have a weird process for writing. I write everything longhand, and I don't just have somebody in mind. I actually talk to this person every time as I'm drafting a book, And so what I do is I write by hand in the morning, and then I have young kids, so I have to get up at like 5, and I write for about 2 hours. Usually get about 5 or 6 handwritten pages, and that type it in throughout the rest of the day. Like as I go about my day, I get those. It's usually about 1,000 words, and I get it into the document. And then once we get the kids to bed at night, I go back to the office and I call my mom. And so I call my mom and I read to her those new 1,000 words that I've written for that scene. And this is why this works. And I know you've got a much different, like we've talked about this. This is why this works though. It's because, you don't ever want to let the air out of the balloon. You don't want to read somebody something and them kind of go, this is why this works because it's my mom. And my mother has never heard anything I've ever read that's not the best thing I have ever read in my life, or she's ever written. So every night I read her, and it's good for editing. It's good for the lines, and I can. But I finish, and she's like, "Eli, honey, that is amazing." I'm like, "Yes, ma'am," and I hang up. And when the alarm goes off at 5, I'm writing for her, and she was a teacher, and she's a big reader. So yeah.
It's a tough question for me because on a certain level, I am writing for myself. I'm always thinking, okay, I mean, it's easier said than done, but write what you would want to read. It's certainly something that I try to do, but I've always got a critic's voice in my head. And the critic was a poetry teacher that I had who was responsible for the first publication that I ever got. Without him, I probably never would have pursued publication of any kind. His name is R.T. Smith. He's up in Rockbridge County, Virginia, and just a really great editor and poet. And I can just, anything sloppy, I could see him coming in and saying, like, is that the best choice? You can do better. Even though he may never have said those things to me.
Right.
I just know how
You're
critical.
hearing that voice. Yeah. Have you tried calling Eli's mom?
I should do that. I do not call my mom. I told her not to read the book, and I'm serious. She said, "Well, I'm going to," and I said, "Well, can you forget your son wrote it?"
Yeah.
Yeah, that would that would be. So, do you know if she has read it?
Oh yeah, she read it twice.
Did she want to talk about it?
She did. She actually said, this book really haunts me. But she meant it as a compliment.
Yeah,
And
it is.
I actually should have trusted all along that she would take it for what it really was and still love me. My dad has a harder time with it.
Has he read it? Yeah. What other books should people who like your books read?
I'm teaching a class this semester called Modern Crime Novel. So these aren't all, but and of course I just picked like some of my favorite books, like to teach. But there's a great book written in 1957 by a Mississippian named Elliot Chase. And I think he worked for the newspaper in like Hattiesburg. And the book's called Black Wings Has My Angel. Small, little, like 190 page book. I don't know. It's a heist novel, but the heist happens like right in the middle of the book. So you actually get to see them get the money and then what the money does to them, Very, very good. But I think like Sean Cosby, S.A. Cosby is a guy, Virginia guy, but a lot of the same sort of stuff.
Yeah, I don't often read like
Yeah.
the kind of stuff that I write, which I think I like to draw from a deeper well than just reading crime fiction. But I'd say some of the same things like Sean Cosby, Eli, and stuff.
David Joy is a guy from North Carolina that fits in that world too.
And I really love. I reread Red Harvest by Dashiell Hammett recently, and man, that book just moves. Something about it was really incredible as a crime novel, and I mean, I've always loved Willa Cather and William Faulkner's Sanctuary. There's something about Sanctuary in particular that stands out from his other work, I think, and there's just a poetry of the line that I really value. Any book that's where the prose elevates the story itself, I think, is what I'm looking for, and those are a few of the. Joseph Conrad, they aren't similar, but
Yeah, I don't think they have to be similar for, the 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 vibe to be, something that would go along. Um, what is so I know you have an MFA, you teach. Can you sum up your entire, writing education with one piece of advice for any authors in our audience?
yeah, I think inspiration comes from hard work. It doesn't just happen. You can't rely on inspiration. It happens about 5% of the time. So just do it every day, and you will inspire yourself.
Henry and I were on this panel a couple weeks ago in Nashville, and a good buddy of mine named William Boyle, who, speaking of books, he writes about Brooklyn, from Brooklyn, lives in Oxford now, but that book is called Saint of the Narrow Street, and it comes out in February, and it is one of the best things I've read in a long, long time. Bill was on this panel, and we got asked a similar question, and this was his answer about like writerly advice, and I just thought it was the best. It's three things, and every day he writes them down on a sheet of paper. Same three, like a reminder to himself, and it's be a fan first, make weird choices, and don't get bitter. And I thought, wow, there's a lot of advice in that. Be a fan first, make weird choices, and don't get bitter.
I'm writing that down.
Yeah.
I mean, those
Yeah.
are great. I'll start doing them every day. Don't get better. Okay. I was going to see if there were any questions from the audience. Yeah.
You have a very unconventional
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, so I did all that football stuff, and then my daughter was born, and I was spending more time with those football players than I was with my kids. So I got out of coaching, and I just had all this. I majored in English lit. I was a reader, but I'd written some in college, and I just poured as much of like that same sort of discipline, like daily workout practice, into writing. And I wrote 3 books that will never see the light of day. I still have them. I need to just burn them because they were the learning, they were the learning novel. And I'd read this great quote from Ray Bradbury, and Ray Bradbury said, "You're not a real writer until you've written 1,000,000 words," which it kind of coincides with Malcolm Gladwell and the 10,000 hour rule. So that's something I teach my students is like, you are learning to write right now, so as I wrote those 3 failed manuscripts and a bunch of short stories, I was trying to learn to write. And then the 4th manuscript I wrote was my first book, Don't Know Tough. And I really felt like it was good. I really felt like I'd reached that status of I was writing real book. It got rejected over 200 times by literary agents. So I got about 2 years worth of rejections. And then Soho, which this beautiful story, an author by the name of Peter Lovesey. It was 50th year anniversary. Peter's a British guy, mystery novelist, and they tell him, we're going to throw this big party, this gala, to celebrate your 50th anniversary of this book. And he says, no, like let's host a contest, because that's how he got into writing, was some like first publication contest. So lo and behold, I submit to this contest, and somehow he picks it. This guy across the pond picks this book about high school American football, in Arkansas. And that was it. That's how I got in. And I didn't have an agent. That was it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you really have to have a full manuscript before you look for an agent most of the time. As far as light bulb moments, I did not know I never know what I'm writing before I start writing. I was kind of writing on the rebound because of that first book that I wrote. Didn't go anywhere, and I just was like, all right, I've got to write something else. So there was no light bulb moment. I really just started with an image, and the image became, you know, characters and characters that I learned about as I was writing. So the light bulb moment came later at the point of no return and at some point during the writing process. But yeah.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
I'll say that when I was like, we have two kids, a job, all the writing stuff. The first thing that had to go was like TV. Like that is the one. It was like I was seeing like how many hours I was spending just sitting, and so that's the one. But I say that so I'm not super current, on a lot of movies. Um, but yeah, I guess, and that's probably why I had so much trouble answering. You know what? I
Cast,
did
yeah.
watch a recent one that I felt was right, kind of in line with all the authors. It was Rebel Ridge. It just came out on Netflix. Have anybody heard of that? Rebel Ridge. It was so good, and it just came out. But it kind of falls in that rule crime with action and great.
Yeah, I've got very young kids. I
We're really
it had to go too. I mean, almost one and almost three, so I'm not watching a lot of TV right now. So I haven't seen anything in a long time.
Any other questions? Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. 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 Well, I'll say this. The last nod to Juliet is we would go through, and in the book, we're changing it in like a Word document, and you can leave comments. And over on the side, she would just put, anytime that we needed more about the chick, she would just put chicken porn. Need more chicken porn, and she would just leave like these notes all through the manuscript that just said chicken porn. More. So I'd have to go dig and find to really show it. But I said that about Arkansas and about writing about Arkansas, and I've lived in South Florida, I've lived in Sweden, and we're back in our hometown, and I love my home state. But there is a lot about my home state that I would like to change and like to see changed. And that was a big part of this book, after coaching and teaching students and seeing that up close. There's a big part of this book that is also like, okay, if somebody can read this and it changed the way they think about something, then that's as much you can ask for.
Has there been any big chicken blowback from writing this?
Big Chicken Blowback. That's the name of the next one.
That's
The sequel. Big Chicken Blowback. No. Tyson's got so much, and it's not Tyson in the book, and they don't
Yeah.
care. It's a blip on their radar.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go, Henry.
Set in the same region in Southside Virginia, but I'm going to focus on a sub-region that I wrote about, which is called the Snakefoot. Yeah, nothing right about that. Yeah, it's called the Snakefoot, and it's going to be I mean, it's going to be good. You should get it.
Does it have a title in your mind?
Yes, right now, and I think I'll probably stick with this, Orphans of Paradise. And don't tell me that's not a good title
That's right.
because I'm probably going with it. So,
Your mic kind of crackled. What
Sorry
was it
about
again?
Orphans of Paradise. I got too into it.
Yeah, that's good.
Juliet really teed this one up because after all that crap I talked about Arkansas and all my books, the next book's called Mississippi Blue 42. And the protagonist is a federal agent from Arkansas, but she is in a fictional Mississippi town as a leg of the white collar crime division of the FBI to investigate a big college football program. So it's a deep dive into the big money world of college football. Mississippi Blue 42.
It's a good title.
Thanks.
Yeah, my last question was going to be, what are you working on now? What do you? So I appreciate your question. Well, let's give a round of applause for Eli and Henry.